and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Jim. I'm back from a work trip, and I'm here with my buddy Mike. And we are brought to you by Mantis X. Mantis is a family of training devices to track your movements while you do live and dry fire training. It times and tracks everything you do in a shooting drill and coaches you as you go. It's indispensable to making your shooting advance to the next level. You can find them on mantisx.com.
And this is Mike. It's also brought to you by Ride-On Optics. Ride-On is bringing you high-quality HD glass from Japan in all of their scopes and red dot sights. Ride-On is a company focused on people and quality, and their products are backed by an unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their products, they will replace it, not repair it. They are veteran and law enforcement owned, and you can find them at rideonoptics.com.
So tonight we're going to talk about fog and friction. And fog and friction is one of those things that most people around the combat worlds have heard of. And it's one of those things that it has come to mean whatever you want it to mean, right? It has come to mean like basically Murphy's Law. Oh, fog and friction. Oh, or when you lose all your IQ points, you're going to hit fog and friction, that sort of thing. And it has become so nebulous that it's meaningless. And that keeps us from really understanding it, mastering it, using it to our advantage in some cases, and learning how to work through it in a meaningful way. So tonight we're going to talk about fog and friction. This is a doctrinal term, which of course makes my little Jim heart happy because I love doctrine stuff. And it has been discussed and studied for like thousands of years. This is one of those things that we figured out about war like 2,000 years ago. Sun Tzu wrote about it. The problem is everything Sun Tzu ever wrote and the people associated with Sun Tzu always reads like a fortune cookie, and like it again, it's too vague to be helpful. And then in the 1800s, there was this dude named Clausewitz. Clausewitz was a Prussian Army War College professor, general guy. And he was like, I'm going to take all these ideas and I'm going to study them. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to give all my generals, my colonels, like something to study and something to work from. And so he tried to turn it into something more concrete. And whether he's right or wrong with a lot of his conclusions, that's what basically most of the generals and colonels in the U.S. military and most of the NATO military study when they're studying topics like fog and friction. So we're going to get into Clausewitz and what he had to say about it. So that's a little primer. Mike, can you give us a little law enforcement view of fog and friction?
It's not going to be specific just to law enforcement. I'll talk more generally about public safety. What I have noticed is that fog and friction tends to be what we all use as a little bit of a cop-out. So when things don't go our way, when we get the proverbial clusterfuck that, an incident starts to spiral out of our control and we didn't really know what happened, we kind of just blame it on, fog and friction, shit happens. And It's kind of a cop-out. And there's something that is relatable here, I think, and this is why I'm going to use the example that I'll use, but it's relatable for anyone in public safety. But I think most people can also agree that, like, imagine being in a movie theater. And the example that I use whenever I run people in public safety through this imagery exercise, I go through the Aurora, Colorado shooting. And if you're not familiar, this shooting happened in a movie theater while Batman was playing. So I want you to imagine an action-packed movie with explosions and violence and stuff going on. And some guy in the movie theater starts cranking rounds off and shooting people. Oh, and not only that, but he's setting off like improvised explosive devices with OC canisters or something like that. He had like
canisters.
OC, like pepper spray, but like he had OC canisters that were somehow rigged to, and I don't know. They probably weren't actually explosive. He probably just aerosolized it into the air. I'm not real familiar with exactly how those were constructed, but you get the idea, right? So you have this movie going on. You've got this stuff in the air that's making you cough and sneeze and snot's running down your face, and it's causing this kind of difficulty with breathing, and it's dark and you can't see, and the flashes of lights, and there's gunfire in the movie and gunfire in real life. And I think anyone can probably relate to just the beginning stages of that. Now, that can be, imagine going to a sporting event, right? You're at the, football game, college football game, and shots get fired and everyone starts running everywhere. You don't know where they're coming from. You don't know where people don't know where they're going. You don't know where they're coming from. It's just chaos and panic, right? And it takes a while to really get grips with what is going on. And there's this delay that happens, and something that Amanda Ripley talks about in her book, The Unthinkable, which is a favorite of the show, is the delay and deliberation process that happens when those shots are fired and you start trying to wrap your head around what's happening. And this happens in just about any kind of emergency, a car accident, a fire, an earthquake, so it's not limited to the military or to law enforcement or to public safety, but I like the Aurora, Colorado example because I can apply it to any of those, right? So if you are a first responder, firefighter, paramedic, EMT, police officer, and even going a step further to the hospitals and those sorts of people, you can imagine that now you're going to this scene, right? The scene of the movie theater, the police are getting there. And by the way, the audio, the police and fire audio for the Aurora, Colorado shooting is all on YouTube, and we'll put some links to that. But I think it's worth your time. The first 15 minutes of the police audio for Aurora, Colorado, and there's a little quote of it you'll notice in the beginning of our intro little clip that we got going on. Listen to the first 15 minutes of it. And I just want you to imagine being there. The cops show up. They have no suspect information. They don't know anything about the shooter. Over and over and over on the radio, they're repeating, he's in theater number 9. He's in theater number 9. There's people running out. They're bleeding. They're screaming. They're pointing. They're saying theater number 9, theater number 9. And if you listen to this audio, you'll hear the guys that are showing up on scene repeat over and over and over. Guys, did anyone hear it's in theater number 9? By the way, it's in theater number 9, guys. It's getting repeated over and over and over. And if you're just sitting there, with your phone or at your computer listening to that, you're probably thinking obviously, guys, pay attention to the radio. Gosh, they already said that. But I want you to put yourself in their shoes. People are running all over the place. They don't even know where theater number 9 is, let alone what's actually going on inside that theater, right? And then when you finally make it in there, it's more chaos, right? Again, you've got the movie playing, full volume, the lights are off. You want someone to turn the lights on, turn the movie off, so you could see what you're doing, so you could find a threat, so you could deal with the victims. Man, that's a lot to take in and deal with. And so that is fog and friction, right? And it's really hard to actually capture that in training. To construct a scenario where you can really get that. You need not just role players, but good actors, like actual actors. And you need a lot of them, and a lot of stimulus, and a lot of sensory deprivation, and a lot of, and not in an artificial way, not like, oh, well, let's put blurry glasses over them and it's harder to see. Okay. Yeah, I guess, but if you do it right, they have enough going on. And so the fog and friction part of dealing in a fight, whether it's in Aurora, Colorado, in a movie theater, or overseas in combat, is still the same sort of thing. And sure, you can have more or less energetic examples. Aurora, Colorado is obviously very energetic.
Many of the active shooter events are exactly like that, though. The Las Vegas concert shooting had all kinds of stray voltage and fog and friction. Yeah. Columbine, of course, did. It tends to come up in scenarios like that. There's a clue.
Yep. But there are less energetic, the more deceptive, kind of sneaky, the confusion, the darkness, the my lights are out and I don't know if anyone's in my house kind of thing. There's other examples that are maybe less energetic, but the feeling should be the same. The feeling should be that you're having a hard time grasping what is actually happening. Your perception of reality is distorted, right? So that's what I want you to think about going forward when we say fog and friction. It's not just, oh, this was a clusterfuck and things went sideways. No. Put yourself in that state of mind where you are absolutely confused and you're trying to cope with reality.
And, you're not allowed to just throw your hands up, right? It's a recurring theme throughout our program is you don't get to just say, Jesus, take the wheel. Yeah, it's a clusterfuck. That's great. But you'll notice the difference between how a young guy handles a clusterfuck and how, like, the old guys handle the clusterfucks. There's some training that we can do and some experience that we can do to get you through that, right? So the fact that it's a clusterfuck shouldn't handcuff you. So I'm going to do some of the traditional doctrinal definitions. When you hear fog, I want you to think drop in situational awareness that comes in a fight. Think drop in situational awareness that comes in a fight. And when you hear friction, think about anything that impedes you along the way from doing what it is you're trying to do. So fog, drop in situational awareness. Friction, the fact that things in the fight are going to impede you from getting your job done. Okay? So what Clausewitz said about fog, Professor Clausewitz to his War College students back in 1850, back when there was a Prussia, he said, war is the realm of uncertainty. 3/4 of the factors on which action in war is based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty. A sensitive and discriminating judgment is called for. A skilled intelligence to scent out the truth is called for. Okay? So he's all about uncertainty. You don't know. And one of the recurring jokes that we have on the program is every fight you're ever in, you don't know what the other guy's going to do. You don't know what he's got in his pockets. You might have heard it, and it's maybe a little off color, and I apologize. Mexican judo. Do you know if he's got a knife? Do you know if he's got a gun? Do you know if he's got 3 guys standing behind you? You don't know, right? And that's important. And it's a big part of your drop in situational awareness is how much you don't know about what the other guy is doing. So, fog is the doctrinal term for all the things in a fight that crush your situational awareness. Everything from keeping your head down so you don't get shot. That affects your situational awareness. Weather, clouds, dust, smoke, radar jamming, radar spoofing, decoys, intentional feints when the other guy is pretending to do something that he's not really doing, garbled radios. Oh, and sometimes literal fog. But you'll notice that isn't the language Clausewitz uses. He talks about uncertainty, the fact that you're rolling the dice in the fight. And it's that uncertainty that you got to work your way through, right? On friction, what Clausewitz said about it is we have identified danger, physical exertion, intelligence, and friction as the elements that coalesce to form the atmosphere of war. Basically, the atmosphere of fighting is such that every step along the way, it's going to make easy things hard. That's my words, not his, but roll with it, okay? Back into his words, and turn it into a medium that impedes activity. In their restrictive efforts, they can be grouped into a single concept of friction. So in essence, he's saying Murphy's Law really does apply in combat. And the more people, the more machines, the more plans you have to execute, the more opportunities for failure you're going to induce. I always want you to think, when you're thinking about friction, think about the difference between an AK-47 and like a fancy Swiss watch, right? A little bit of sand gets in an AK-47, it's probably not going to affect much. A little bit of sand gets in a fancy Swiss watch, you're going to shut it down. The friction, right? So just one example of friction from my world. I was working in an operations center back in the day. I was moving close air support assets around gunships and A-10s and NATO strike airplanes. And there was a troops in contact. So special forces teams in a firefight, they call on the radio, hey, we're a tick, troops in contact. That's fine. They're a special forces team. They know what they're doing. We're going to move some air to them and they're going to go drop a bomb. And it's going to be great. So I was passing the retasking to the airplane via a computer chat. And the computer I was controlling, also my radio was running through that computer. So if I wanted to key him up and talk on voice, I had to do it through the computer. And as I was doing that, as I was moving a gunship to go kill some bad guys and protect the good guys, the computer's like, fuck you, I'm doing a restart for an update. And I'm like,
Of course it was.
damn it. And it's that was a very uncomfortable feeling, and it worked out fine. It was fine. But I went to the IT guys, and I'm like, guys, that cannot happen. You got to give me some warning. And the IT major bowed up on me. He's like, well, we cleared it through the Army Sergeant Major. And I'm like, that's wonderful that you cleared it through some Sergeant Major. You didn't clear it through me. And that's not a dick measuring thing. That's just a, hey, lives.
Like, you're the guy.
I'm the guy to move the air, right? So everything gets a little harder, not easier in a fight. And kind of the analogy for this is walking is easy. Walking across a stream is hard. It's the same basic physical movements, but it gets a lot more complicated when you've got the resistance of water and slippery rocks, stuff like that. Fighting is a lot like that.
Or running patrons out of a movie theater. They're all running out of the theater that you're trying to get into to go close with and kill the bad guy.
There's actual resistance to you getting where you're trying to go, right?
Yeah, you're literally swimming upstream in those kinds of scenarios, and that's a common thing that we have to train and prepare to deal with. We get these guys that come through the academy, and they're like, "Yeah, I'll take this 60-yard, shot with my pistol, no big deal." And it's like, dude, if this is happening in real life, there are going to be people everywhere. Just because we only got 10 or 15 role players here today to set this up doesn't mean that if you were at a school for real, there is going to be a lot happening here. And just the swimming upstream and trying to find an angle on that guy is way harder than it sounds.
And it has been done, right? We know of one example where it really did happen. It was Fairchild Air Force Base, Andy Brown. We interviewed him. He made a 68-yard shot with a pistol. It can be done, but you can't guarantee it. You can't.
And that's not the only example, to be clear, but you have to be able to wrap your head around this side of it to make it happen.
Yeah. So there are things you can do that will affect fog and friction. You can train against it. You can design your plans against it. And there's a lot you can do that will contribute to fog and that will contribute to friction, right? If he's in theater number 9 and you're screaming on the radio, he's in theater number 8, you're adding signal to noise, or noise to signal, I guess I should say. You're adding noise to signal. And we saw that. We saw that in the Las Vegas concert shooting. If you listen to the audio on that, at least the unencrypted, publicly accessible audio on that, you hear lots and lots and lots of reports because people were hearing the echoes of the rounds through the urban canyon that is the Las Vegas Strip. And so they thought there were like 10 shooters, and they were hearing them all over the place. And everywhere they saw a guy with a gun, which was usually like a Las Vegas PD guy or armed security at the casinos, they were reporting that. And so they were chasing ghosts for like hours.
And if you think about like a well-executed terrorist attack, is that far-fetched? I mean, would it be far-fetched if you go to an active shooter at a event happening on the Vegas Strip that someone hasn't coordinated an attack and there are several? I mean, that's not something that if you were in that event and someone started saying like, okay, I could see that being the case, and we have to deal and cope with that too.
And that has happened. That happened in India. There was a Pakistani affiliated attack team that did a 3-day active shooter event. So, there's a saying in active shooter events, and I don't want to make this just an active shooter episode, but it comes up a lot with active shooter stuff. There's one shooter until there isn't, right? And until you prove that there's one shooter or two shooters, then there's just one shooter, something like that.
Yeah. And sometimes there are two. We talked about the San Bernardino attack.
Columbine.
With Gary Schulke, and that was an example of a 2-shooter incident. Yeah, Columbine is another example. So there are. Yeah. And the active shooter, I know it keeps coming up, but it's because it's relatable to an active gunfight that you might see overseas and one that you might see, here at home. So something that's come up several times in some of these examples that Jim is just saying is the communication components. And I think this is one of the things when we talk about friction that is really a good point to highlight, because you have the situational awareness component where you're trying to communicate everything so that people have all of the information that they need. But we know that we can't get all the information that way. So there's a bottleneck for the people that aren't there yet of, okay, I'm broadcasting what I can, but they're only going to get the bits and pieces because they can actually see and hear and smell and take all the inputs from people that are pointing in whatever direction and all that. So there's a situational awareness side of it. And there's also the friction side of it, which is in most communication networks, generally speaking, and there might be some exceptions, although I don't know how helpful they would be, but for the most part, only one person can talk at a time. And while that person is talking, they're only giving one perspective of a three-dimensional problem. So these kinds of events, things that are happening in real, and the final thing being that there's always going to be a delay. So there's going to be, I learn the information and then I get on the radio and talk about it, and you have to ask yourself, is it even relevant anymore, right? Oh, he's coming up around that red SUV. Well, by the time I transmitted that and you heard it, he might be 3 cars away now. So it doesn't really help that much unless you can contextualize it, right? So fog and friction can be either reduced or amplified by communication. And how much you say and the way that you say it and the time that you say it, all of those things matter. But if you ever read case studies, you'll always hear some points about communication. Communication was a problem, or we need to improve communication, and it usually gets boiled down to things like, do we need more channels or did we have too many channels? Did we have common communications, or was everything too plain language, too plain text that there was no brevity to it? Those are all good points. What I want to focus on, though, is implicit communication. So as a way to reduce some of the fog and friction that happens when you're dealing with dynamics of a group or a team or a unit, if it, military or law enforcement sense, a group of people trying to communicate, I want to amplify my ability to communicate implicitly. What do I mean by that? Well, it's things like, if I go on the radio and I say, hey, I'm taking a position on the front of the residence, then someone behind me should know, okay, that means I should go to the back. I don't have to say, hey man, I'm going to the front, and by the way, can someone go to the back? Someone can already pick up on that. And we do the same sort of thing on a SWAT team. If I'm moving through a house, right, and I start pointing my gun in a certain direction, and my teammate behind me sees my helmet turn a little bit that direction, that he's going to cover the angle the other direction, right? We're communicating. He's seeing what I'm doing. He sees the angles that I have and the perspective that I'm taking. So he's going to go cover something else. We're still communicating though, right? And that's important, because if I take one angle and then I change my mind and go back to change the other way, like that's going to throw off his rhythm. He's going to think that I needed that side covered, right? So implicit communication is something that I want you to think about as a way to reduce some of those friction points, because only so much can be conveyed over the radio. And there's a lot that happens non-verbally, whether in person or over the air, that can affect these factors.
And one of the big keys to that is obviously training together and training outside of your specialty, right? And with people from other specialties. The other is empathy. Can you put yourself in the shoes of the other guy on the radio and know what he needs to hear, how he needs to hear it? When is he busy? When is he not busy? And that's big on in flying and crew resource management. Is there's times when the pilots are sitting there on an airplane, bored out of their minds, and they have all the time in the world to sit and talk and bullshit. And there are times when they're crazy busy, right? Doing an actual instrument approach or handling an emergency procedure, that sort of thing. So knowing what kind of situation the other guy on the other end of the radio or the other end of the intercom is going through, I think matters. And you get that by training together and thinking about the other guy.
And being able, empathy is a good way of describing that, because you want to know what their MO is, like how they normally operate will help you understand that. And if you understand how they operate, you can anticipate their needs a little bit better. And that's like Jim is saying, you can give them the stuff when they need it, when it's relevant, because you know what they're going through.
Yeah. And as an air guy, I'm big on, you have to understand what the ground guys are up to, right? And so you know what normal looks like, and you know what assed up looks like without calling them on the radio. Because you can see them through your sensors, what they're up to, right? I'm expecting them to be in a certain shape of formation, or I'm expecting them to move. If they get in trouble, they're going to move. And if they stop, that should stand out to me, that sort of thing. Another thing along those lines is positional awareness is a really big deal. We're going to do an episode about fratricide, friendly fire events. The number one contributing factor to friendly fire events is loss of positional awareness. Somebody gets lost. Somebody is where we're expecting the bad guys to be is a good guy, right? And there's lots of ways you can solve that. You can solve that with battle tracking, like move dots around on a map. You can solve that with things like blue force tracking, which is electronic battle tracking. But having a picture in your head of where everybody is on the friendly side, so that will help you figure out who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and what do they need, that sort of thing.
I think another example of a way this plays out is, and it's kind of a communication component, but it's also just an operational component, which is making sure that we're all on the same page about what the objective is. I went through some really good training a while back. It's hosted and paid for by Homeland Security, and it's some counterterrorism type stuff, and it deals with homemade explosives. And one of the takeaways from that course had to do with our tendency, if we're dealing with a terror attack, for example, the tendency of police officers to lay a criminal template over the situation in terms of counterterrorism. So you're dealing with an active shooter or a bomber or something along those lines. It doesn't matter what. And making sure that we're clear about what our objective is here. Is it to secure the crime scene, to do an investigation, or is it to end a threat, right? An active and ongoing threat. And sometimes we have to make sure that we kind of communicate that. So if you go back to some of the active shooter incidents, you'll notice a big difference in the way that dispatchers will broadcast these things. And sometimes they'll actually get on the radio and say that someone is shooting, or they'll say it's a possible active shooter. And sometimes they'll just say, oh, it's for shots fired, right? It's a shots fired call. At my agency, we go to shots fired calls probably, I don't know, a few times a day. It's not an uncommon thing, right? But just saying, oh, it's just shots fired. Okay, it's just another shots fired call, whatever. That's different because we're thinking about going there with, all right, well, let's go investigate what happened. Let's make sure that no one's hit. Let's go do the policing thing, right? We're putting this criminal investigation template over an otherwise fairly routine call, as opposed to the doctrine of, no, this is an active shooter. Someone is actively killing innocent people, right? And active shooter nowadays is kind of a wonky term because active killer, it's not always guns and blah, blah, blah. But you understand where I'm going with this is, if I say, no, this is an active shooter, now my objective is close with and kill the guy that's taking innocent lives, right? Making sure that we're all on the same page. What is our objective right now, right? If it's not secure the crime scene, locate the victim, right? Locate possible victims, render aid, evacuate the injured. Making sure that we're all on the same page will steer a lot of the fog and friction because you'll be more clear, and we'll talk about a little bit later why that matters, but you'll be a little bit more clear about the direction that you're headed. And so similarly with the positional awareness, I think it's important that everyone is on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish right now.
Yeah, so the cognitive template that you assign to the situation that you're in can really hose you when it comes to inducing fog and friction on yourself, right? And so having kind of that flexible approach, a healthy skepticism, which is, I'm going to wait and see a little bit. Sometimes waiting and seeing can make things go a little bit more smoothly as far as building your situational awareness about a crisis.
A little bit of doubt. I like
something
that.
we need to talk about is how do we train to this, right? What can we do to teach the new guys how to handle it? Do we just put them into World War III day one of the academy, whether that's the police academy or the Army academy at West Point or whatever? Is that what we need, and is that actually value added? My experience is usually throwing guys in the deep end early doesn't get you much. But at some point, they do need to see the deep end. At some point, they do need some chaos and induced fog and friction.
And I think a key to this, we have to be careful in how we differentiate between coping with fog and friction and just dealing with stress, right?
Yeah.
Stress inoculation is one thing, and that's important, and it does contribute to this fog and friction stuff that we're talking about. Not at the strategic doctrinal level necessarily that we intend it to in this episode, but if you can work better in those environments under stress and with that, fewer IQ points and all that stuff, then you tend to cope with this a little bit more. And I think it's important that we talk just characteristically about these sorts of scenarios because they tend to have misinformation or conflicting information.
Yep.
They tend to be time sensitive. They tend to be I mentioned earlier the sensory deprivation stuff. So a lot of loud noises. It's hard to hear. It's hard to see. It's hard. There's all of those things which also contribute to the way that you perceive, and your brain will see it as inherently stressful, right? Your fight or flight sympathetic nervous system is going to kick into gear, which is just going to further complicate things. But I think that's more on an individual level. Whereas what I want to talk about more here is this is more talking about as a unit or, in terms of group dynamics, right? Like I'm a group of police officers going to this 911 call, or in Jim's world, a group of special forces dude chasing down a terrorist, or, whatever it is. There's another layer to it. So if you want more about stress inoculation stuff, I think the Rand paper that we've referred to on the show a number of times, they did a study on enhancing human performance under stress for battlefield airmen. I'll put a link to it. We've put it a number of times, but they talk about all the strategies for what Jim is saying. Like you could throw a guy in the deep end, but he needs some strategies to cope with that, right? Like you need certain skills that you have to layer into that, and you need certain coping strategies to layer into that. And those are all their own little things to deal with before you get to that like deep end situation.
Yeah. And you have to select for it. And you have to be honest about your hiring process and who you're bringing into your organization. Some people are always going to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable and comfortable in that chaotic situation than others. Now, there's art and science to how you pick those people, and sometimes it's not who you would expect handles those novel situations well. But think about in your selection, who in this room is going to handle when things get kind of weird, right? And who's going to lock up? That's what you don't want, are the people who are going to lock up. You want the people who are going to keep working trying to fix it. And another thing I want you to think about in training is that every time you toss out an excuse, a training alibi of, oh, we don't do that in training. Oh, we don't do that in exercises. We do it differently in the real world. I want you to think about you are inducing or you're accepting a friction point. And practice makes permanent. The more often you practice skipping over, doing it the hard way, I think you need to go back and be like, well, are we really going to do this in real life or not? The train like you fight like you train sort of thing. You see in military exercises a lot. The Air Force will say, well, if we were really under, terrorist condition, Delta, we would sandbag around all the buildings. And they'll put out little like Post-it notes saying simulated sandbags. Because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to fill 9,000 million sandbags just to dump them all out, 3 days after the exercise, right? That's a stupid waste of time. On the other hand, if you don't ever fill the sandbags, you may not realize you don't have any sandbags.
or enough, or whatever,
or they've got, the rats have chewed holes through them or whatever. There's 10,000 things that could happen to your sandbags. You also might find it takes a hell of a lot longer to fill sandbags than you think. And then by the time you guys are done doing it, they're exhausted and dirty, and they're not real eager to do anything else you want them to do. Right. So it's one of those, like, be very careful what you alibi yourself.
We see the same thing in public safety exercises, and I've seen it at, again, different levels, working on the EMS side of it as well as in law enforcement, and not only in patrol settings but also in the special teams where we'll admin certain things. We're going to admin that containment is these guys got containment, but you just have to make sure that you're clear about what assumptions that you're making, that they're going to do their job. One good example of this is when we practice like we're going to go do a SWAT operation and we're going to have a guy go down, right? A guy gets hit and we're going to do like a medical casualty evacuation. And we've drilled this a lot, right? We do the briefings and we talk about the plans and we do all these things. And when we admin it, when we do it in training, we walk it through. We don't admin everything. We actually will throw a guy in a car and go drive off somewhere and do those sorts of things. But if you're not careful, then you start forgetting where those friction points become. So on a real life operation, not very long ago, we had an incident where there was an officer involved shooting. There was a canine that got struck by gunfire. And one of the big things that ended up coming out of it was like switching channels to the tactical frequency that we were on over to the patrol frequency to coordinate resources. And that's one of those things where you can admin really well. You know, if you're the team leader and you're sitting down and you're going, okay, I would switch over to the patrol channel. I would tell them I want this, and the other thing. Like check. You're going down your little checklist, and cognitively, those are good things to put on your radar. But what you don't, and so in the aftermath of this incident, when we did the debrief, one of the things that we talked about was, yeah, no problem. We'll just switch over. We'll have them combine those two channels. And I remember one of the points of discussion was I raised my hand and go, hey, just so you know, the ability for the dispatcher to combine channels with one, because that is something that they're capable of taking two channels and merging them. How fast that happens depends entirely on who's sitting on the other end of the radio when you tell them to do that. And so you might get like the trainer that's sitting there and like, oh yeah, it's no problem. But you might also get the noob that needs to like, hey, how do I do this again? And so while we're dealing with the chaos of, officer involved shooting, people hit, whatever, this guy's like calling IT trying to figure out how to do this or whatever. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
yeah, they're Googling it. So it is a good plan, and it's okay as long as you make sure that you understand what assumptions that you're making so that you can curb against it just in case. Because you're gonna find points of friction that you didn't realize were there, and it's stupid stuff like that. Like, okay, we have the capability of doing something, but does anyone actually know how? There was another thing that came out of that where someone told us, okay, well, no problem. We actually put some of those lessons learned into an action plan for another operation, and they said, hey, so what we're going to do is we'll tell dispatch ahead of time that we're going to be doing this so that the person that's working it will go through those procedures before the op, right? So they know how to do it. And they're like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So they called the comm center and they said, hey, be ready for this. And the guy was like, okay, yeah, that's no problem. We'll be ready. And I'll make sure that I'm monitoring that channel while you guys are working. In case something goes sideways, I'll just do it automatically. All you got to do is say so. Well, as kind of a test, because we were like, is that really? That guy was like, we called him twice on the radio during that operation and he didn't answer. Once he was on the phone, or once he wasn't paying it, or he was on the wrong channel actually. And the other time he was on the phone. And so he said he was going to listen on the channel in case we needed to merge. He wouldn't have been able to do that anyway because he was task saturated with other stuff. So again, these are things that are only going to come out when you actually drill it, like it was real. And yeah, that's logistically tiring. No one wants to actually have, hey guys, just for practice, we need to fill 10,000 sandbags to put around the building. No one wants to do that.
No, fuck that.
Right? No one wants to do that.
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't be that guy. But at some point you have to, if you want that to be part of your plan and have it really work.
Yeah, and maybe from doing that, you learn, we don't want to deal with fucking sandbags. Maybe we do a contract. we have someone truck in the sandbags, or we put concrete where we put sandbags, or whatever. But like, get real sensitive to putting out the little post-it note that says, "Oh yeah, simulator, we did this." That doesn't work. Yeah. One thing I want you to think about is layers in your training. Right? There needs to be the fundamental task trainers where you just work on one specific skill. Right? Just drawing the pistol, or just landing the plane, or just grappling, right? And each one of those has kind of a step-by-step, by the numbers, crawl, walk, run. I hate the phrase crawl, walk, run because we abuse it, but you do need to do that. And then at some point, you need to do that under time or under stress, and then you need to integrate that into all the other skills into full-up scenarios, and then you need to do full-up scenarios with a little chaos factor. Now, how you do that is kind of the art and science of leadership and training and knowing your guys and reading the room, but you need to do that. You need to think about those layers. So if you have a training day, I mean, maybe one training day is just fundamentals, one training day is, fundamentals integrated into everything else, and one training day is, hey guys, today is a chaos day. We're just going to go gonzo, right? Or you do a little bit of everything, and that's up to you. And again, you kind of have to read your room and your team. Another thing I want you to think about is, we talked a little about induced stress in training. It's related, but it's not the same, right? But it is a little helpful. It might be useful to get your heart rate up. And Mike and I have talked a lot about just getting your heart rate up doesn't really get you there, right? You also need the stress hormones and fight or flight reaction, the sympathetic nervous response. But having your heart rate up does affect things like fine motor skills, right? One of my favorite fog and friction things is the goddamn simunition masks. You put the thing on, you can't really move, you can't really see through it. Every time you breathe, you're fogging it up. And, is there fog and friction there? Yes. Does it have some value? Well, kind of. It's not terribly unlike wearing a gas mask in terms of, replicating real life. It's better than nothing. But at the end of the day, you want to represent actual problems that guys are actually going to run into. You want an operationally representative training environment.
And in training, one of the things that this is where you have to talk about like risk a little bit too.
Oh, yeah.
Because the simunition masks being a great example is there's not a great way to wear full up simunition masks and also be able to communicate well.
No.
Right. And, you can buy, like, the simunition guys have stuff that, instead of wearing a Sims mask, you can buy a contraption to put over your actual, helmet that you would work in real life. And it resolves some of those problems if you have the hundreds of dollars per unit to buy them. Right. So there's solutions out there.
Yeah.
But even if you think about things like for law enforcement training, wanting to de-escalate, right? Wanting to create a scenario where there's any face-to-face communication is problematic with a Sims mask.
It's tough
even
to
just
do
the
talking
nonverbal,
skills.
facial expressions, tone of voice stuff gets lost. Not to mention the spoken word.
Yep.
So you have to. There's a risk mitigating component of this where you say, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish with this training? Yeah, we want to shoot Sims at each other because there's a pain penalty and they're graded inducing a little bit of stress and all those things, but what are we giving up to include that? And maybe there's a way around it. Sometimes we're bounded by, safety rules and training guidelines and policy and procedural stuff. And those things can handicap us if we're trying to actually prepare for all the dangerous shit we actually have to do in real life.
Yep.
And so we do have to think about that stuff.
So it wouldn't be a Tactical Tangents episode if we didn't talk about Boyd.
True.
So there was this guy named John Boyd. He was picture like the Viper character from Top Gun back in the day. Came up with a bunch of things like the math that became the F-15, F-16, and F-22. Later in his career, he got kind of obsessed with command and control. That running an organization in a combat environment is the essence of winning, is how you run that organization. He came up with a concept called the OODA cycle or OODA loop, which we've talked a lot about. And one of his secrets to success in how you run an organization in a fight where maybe you get decapitated, maybe your communications get jammed, is all of your fielded forces have to be able to operate with initiative, harmony, variety, and rapidity. I'm going to say that again because it's a jingle. Initiative, harmony, variety, and rapidity. And this is the fog and friction environment is when you've got to do it. That's when it pays off.
So these attributes that Boyd would use to kind of describe these forces, right? Of having these, and it's kind of a dichotomy. You need your guys to have some harmony. In other words, they're all working towards the same objective. They all have clear guidance about what the objective is, like we talked about earlier.
They're not accidentally blocking each other, for example.
Right. But if there's too much harmony and we're all moving in the same direction, then we're back to like the Civil War days or whatever, where we're all lining up across the field from each other, doing the, as Boyd would say, hey diddle diddle straight up the middle.
Yeah, we're not trying to
warfare.
We're not trying to synchronize. We're trying to operate independently in a way that we're all helping each other, right?
Right. And so the harmony there is that everyone is contributing to the objective. And so what that means is we're all kind of on the same page. Not so much harmony that it's too rigid. We don't want to be rigid. We don't want to be too predictable. Like, oh, look, they're all converging on the same location. Perfect. That's not necessarily a good thing, but we do want to be supporting of each other in a sense. Initiative. Actually, I'm going to come back to initiative because that one's useful for the next area. Rapidity has to do, obviously, with speed, and not just raw speed in the sense of getting from A to B as fast as possible, but also your ability to make decisions at a higher tempo than your adversary. So in the fog and friction essence, if you think about, like Jim was talking about, some of those tenets of decentralized command, and you cut off the link between the command and the guys out in the field, now you kind of paralyze their ability to make decisions quickly. I can't just get on the phone or the radio and say, hey, boss, what do you want us to do from here? Do this. Okay, cool. If that process takes too long because there's too many layers in the chain of command, or there's too much red tape, or I have to call and get permission, or all those things, then we lose that ability to move quickly at a higher tempo. Variety means
quick,
I have to have
on rapidity. I'm also trying to make things happen to the other guy quickly, and that doesn't mean, just like Mike said, I don't have to move quickly. But picture like my example of this is like 3 snipers. Maybe they're crawling for days to get to an objective, but they all take shots within seconds of each other, right? So things happen to the enemy quickly, even though those guys aren't moving very quickly.
And part of the just to like from tactically to talk about the rapidity thing has to do with relevance. So it's not necessarily that those things happen quickly, so much as that their ability to deal with that situation as it unfolds is happening too quickly for them to do anything about.
Yep.
Right. So it's like, okay, well, those shots have already been fired, so you're kind of screwed, right? Like, yep. Assuming they hit what they were aiming at, like those guys are off the map, they're off the table.
Yep.
So what happens with too much rapidity is maybe you get out of sync, maybe you lose that harmony, maybe people start to get, the situation changes so fast that we can't cope with it ourselves. Variety being another one of these components is having options. So we don't want to be so committed that this is the only way to accomplish the objective. We have other ways that we can maneuver around obstructions or obstacles, right? That we can kind of flow like water and all those Sun Tzu things that Jim is such a big fan of. So with too much variety, though, again, it's all about these little dichotomies. If we have too much variety, if people are running in too many different directions, then we lose the harmony component, right? We're not in sync. We're not supporting each other in the way that we want to. We want to find the synergy. So flank and maneuver, right? Like one guy's laying a base of fire so that the other guy can maneuver and get an angle on the bad guy. It's basic infantry tactics type stuff. If people are just running and moving on their own will, then we lose that kind of harmony in achieving that. And then my favorite one is initiative. And this is important because, especially in the public safety realm, we are almost always reactive, right? We are almost always reacting to something that is out of our control. A guy started shooting up the shopping mall. A bad guy is taking hostages. Domestic violence call is getting buck wild, whatever. We do a traffic stop and we don't know what the driver's going to do, but when he gets out of the car, we have to deal with, I can't just assume he's going to kill me, but I have to be ready for him to kill me, right? Initiative is all about driving or steering the situation, taking control of the event so that we have some say in the future, right? So instead of being reactive, we want to be proactive. We always talk about that, like action versus reaction. So
and always easier said than done. And it's important to acknowledge that. Easier said than done. It's tough to make things happen to the other guy. It's tough to be proactive. But guess what?
Absolutely.
This is where you make the big bucks.
Right. And so going back to the rapidity thing is what we want to start doing is making them react to us. This is one of the things in the shooting world, for example, people talk about, like, you do your reload, you take a step offline so you can get in the way of his OODA loop. People will drop the OODA loop thing, like sidestepping is going to completely throw the guy off.
Uh-huh.
But what it does is it gets him react. Now he's got to track you instead of you only tracking him. So you're kind of evening the table a little bit. So that's why they say stuff like that. You're taking some initiative. You're making them react. And so there's validity to that. I think we might oversimplify it a little bit when we talk about shooting on a flat range, but that's what they're talking about. So earlier, when I was talking about implicit communication, this is huge because in terms of reducing fog and friction, right, the implicit communication stuff where I go, okay, I'm going to go take a position to the front to try to get eyes on the front door. The next guy should be thinking, okay, well, then I'm going to go to the back so that I can get eyes on the back door. And that doesn't have to be said. They're doing that on their initiative, right? He's going to go fill that hole because he knows that it needs to be done. So when me and my SWAT team buddies are moving through a house and I point my gun to the right, then the guy behind me sees that. And what is he going to do? No one needs to tell him because on his initiative, he's going to go point his gun the other direction to the left. So by having that initiative and getting people to think independently, right, in a harmonious way, this is why, like Jim said earlier, you have to do this in training. You have to work with those same guys. Everyone has to have empathy for each other, anticipate each other's needs. All of those things come together to allow us to start shaping the event instead of reacting to the event, in a sense.
Another thing with this is you are never allowed to just sit there, right? Throwing your hands up and saying, Jesus, take the wheel. Anytime you hit fog and friction, you need to be thinking, what can I be doing right now to fix this, right? And start taking action. So one of my favorite sayings is find work. If the guy goes right, you go left. You just start moving, right? Another thing is commander's intent. If you're in an organization where you need to be told what to do, that's probably a problem, 1. 2, have the conversation with your boss. Hey, boss, in the absence of other guidance, what do you want me doing? Right? And it's usually find work. Go find something useful and fucking do it.
Yeah. We use find work a lot also on my team. If we're talking about clearing a house, is every time you see an angle getting covered, you need to go find an angle to cover that isn't yours, right? Go find work, find something to do, find something that hasn't been cleared and go and clear it. That's part of that initiative thing. You know, that quote, because initiative is again, it's one of those that is actually really simple. We call a lot of our tactics, we talk about initiative-based tactics, right? Like the guy at the front of the stack gets to do whatever he wants because everyone else is going to react to him because he's got that initiative. He can choose his areas of priority. So there's that quote where they talk about, a plan executed, an okay plan executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. Who is I can't remember who
General
said that.
George Smith Patton Jr., obviously.
There you go. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. I knew it was some general. I just couldn't remember exactly which one. So having some kind of thing in motion, even if it's not perfect, is better because now you can start adapting to it. And this is how you have to think about these problems where all this chaos is happening around you, all this stimulus is overwhelming you. You just start chipping away at it. What's my priority right this second, right? What is the thing that demands most of my attention right this second? You deal with that, and then you start working on the next thing. It's better to be mostly right and to start working on that than to sit there and go, well, hold on a second. Let's take 10 minutes and come up with this perfect plan and have it no longer be relevant.
And
don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
And back to active shooter, seconds is lives, right? And we have had a tough learning curve since Columbine specifically of learning that we've got to start doing something quickly. One thing with this is the phrase analysis paralysis. When I'm fighting a bad guy, one of the conditions I'm trying to create is paralysis. I'm trying to get him to freeze. It is so much easier to hit a static target than a moving target. So that's what I want him to do. I want them to freeze. Think both ways on that one. The last thing I want to be is a static target. I want to start freaking moving.
Yeah, as soon as you start stopping to go, You're trying to wrap your head around something. That gives the bad guy more time to plan his way around you, right?
And there is a time and a place to stop and think, right? Sometimes you do need to, okay, let's take a breath, let's smoke one, figure out what's going on, and then move. But you can't just sit there. You got to keep moving.
One of the things I always try to teach new cops, one of the hardest parts of this job isn't going fast or going slow. It's knowing when to go fast, when to go slow.
Yep.
There's times that you need to speed up, hit the gas, right? Move fast, close with and kill the bad guy, right? Active shooter is a perfect example of that. There's times where you got to go kick indoors and, we're all in. And then there's times where we go, hold on a second. What do we actually have here? What are the assumptions that we're making? What questions do we need to ask ourselves to really confirm or dispel what we think is occurring? Because a lot of times what you'll find out is like what started as like this heinous, oh, this guy took hostages and he did this and that. You start talking about it and you're like, no, they're probably just in there drunk and passed out and we haven't got their attention. Maybe we can make a bunch of noise and get their attention.
Yep.
So this goes back to this whole like challenge your assumptions thing. Make sure that you're kind of careful about that. But at some point, you have to know when to go fast, and when it's time to go fast, do it. So in the tactical realm for me, we spend a lot of time doing a lot of detailed planning, right? And this kind of speaks to the initiative stuff a little bit. We'll talk about all these contingencies, and we've got every single person, we're bringing 15, 20 people on this operation. We're going deep. We've got all the gear, all the guns, all the cars, all the this, all of that. Everyone has an assignment. Their assignment is very specific. It's very thought out. It's very boom. Like everyone's got this. It's all written down. This is the plan. This is what we're going to do. But sometimes, well, now it's time to just do SWAT shit, right? Like that's kind of, when we talk about this, we're like, well, yeah, well, the plan was this, but here's where we're at now. Things have changed, right? Part of our ability to deal with that, though, comes from the planning process.
Yep.
We go through all of these plans and we've thought about all of these things. Where I see this, a good example of this is when a rookie patrol person tells me that there's a guy in an apartment. And he's like, yep, he's in there. I've been watching the door. He hasn't come out. And I go, okay, can he get out through the other side of the building? No, the apartments back up to one another. There's only one apartment. He's the only way in and out is through that front door and the bedroom window. And I'm like, no, but can he like break a hole through the drywall and go out the apartment next door? And they're like, what? No, that's because that's happened, right? Like, so now when we think about containment operations on a SWAT thing, we take the whole building because that's happened to us.
You're like the insurance company. We know a lot because we've seen a lot. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's true. Like we've dealt with that problem. We've had people get away from us because that exact thing. So they look at us a little bit sideways, like, are you serious? Yeah, we're serious. So those tactics they're founded in things like that because we've done it, right?
Yep.
And so a lot of those details come from it. But because of that, we've gotten to tease out some of our decision trees. And we'll come back to decision trees and algorithms in a minute. But just think about like that dichotomy there of, okay, we want the planning, we want the details, we want the objectives to be clear, the commander's intent, like Jim said, all those things are great. But we also don't want to hamstring our guys into being so rigid, so predictable, so formal that we lose that flexibility. And that's what really this is all about, is being adaptable and flexible.
Yeah. Along those lines, we talked about this in the disaster episode, that a natural disaster or just a big disaster is complicated. It's inherently complex. So I want you to think about all the complexity so that when you need to make it simple, you can make it simple. It takes that level of detailed planning. One of my favorite sayings is, it's not the plan, it's the planning. That process you go through is what gets you the options for the variety and rapidity, right?
Yeah, and just to for the rapidity angle, we've already thought of it.
Yep.
That's the key, right? We've already thought of it, so we have an if-this relationship with it.
Yep.
Right. So how do you deal with this stuff? I mean, we've given a lot of ideas for kind of chipping away at the fog and friction X factor a little bit. We've talked about some training considerations. We've talked about all the philosophical stuff, So how do we actually put this together and deal with it in real life? A lot of people will say something like, well, you just got to embrace it, right? It's just have to, you just got to embrace the suck. This is just the world we live in and this and that. And I don't know how I feel about that, because dealing with this is absolutely what makes us good or bad at our jobs as a profession, whichever line of work this falls in for you, right? Just like giving it a hug, I don't think is enough. Just embrace the fog and friction. No, you have to actually work through it. So let's talk about the math.
Yeah, well, there's a component here, which is when things get weird, like we've talked about all along, you don't get to just give up, right? So embrace it to the extent that you don't let it crush your soul when it's a shit show. You never just throw your hands up and you're like, well, it's a clusterfuck. I guess we're all going to die. Like, you don't ever get to do that, right? So when I talk about embracing it, I'm talking about having that culture of resilience. Yeah, we're going to have fog and friction. Yeah, we're going to have to deal with it. Yeah, we're going to have to train for it. Yeah, our next exercise is going to have a fucking curveball. Get up for it, right? And having that mindset of giddy up, or that mindset of fuck it, we'll do it live. Now, my problem with embracing it, sort of like what Mike is saying, is fuck it, we'll do it live can't be your plan.
That is not a plan, right?
Hope is not a plan, right? And there are military organizations, very effective military organizations, that maybe that is kind of their motto. Well, when you're SEAL Team Ninja, you can do that. You if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not them. And if you are, I got some stickers for you.
Hit me up.
Yeah. We'll have you on the podcast. But between now and then, you need to have the book, you need to go by the book, and you need to write the book, right?
And this falls into, like I said earlier, the whole do SWAT shit thing. I mean, you're talking about you've exhausted a list of options, a list of possibilities, a list of contingencies. It's not, like Jim said earlier, it's not the plan, it's the planning, right? You've gone through all these things of, well, if this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, and if none of that works, then you know what? We're just going to have to work with what we have.
Off we go.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we get paid to do, is to figure it out. So, but to that end, as you're trying to figure it out, these are some of the things. I mentioned earlier that chipping away at your priorities is a big deal.
Yep.
Identifying what your priority is a big deal. So conflicting information is always a big part of this. So this actually happened to me today. We had a call where there was a robbery that occurred, and this guy, the manager of this store that got robbed, kept eyes on the dude for a little while when he left, and he ended up across the street in the parking lot of a grocery store. And an officer was able to see him in the parking lot, but wasn't real close to him, and started calling resources to set up a perimeter sort of thing. And then the information came to light that maybe he went inside the store. And so we're like, okay. So we shifted our perimeter over to contain the store and basically the whole shopping center where this was occurring. He's inside the store, which is not a great place to confront anybody. And in the midst of dealing with that, people started driving by. Hey, I just saw this guy, and they obviously give the description of our bad guy, get in a car and take off this direction. And then someone else gave us a similar bit of information, and maybe those things were true. So now we're not sure. Did he go inside the store, or did he get in a car and take off? Either of those two options get handled in two entirely different ways. So you have to start weighing the information that you're getting and evaluating how reliable they are, right? So you're starting to challenge some of those assumptions, like I talked about earlier. You're assigning reliability to little bits of intelligence or information that you're getting. And by the way, what's the difference between intelligence and information? Information is a detail or something that you're told, right? Intelligence is what that means for you. Why does it matter? Why does it matter if the guy went in the store? Why does it matter if the guy got in a car? Yeah. Because those steer our tactics.
Something
right?
you can act on, right? And that's the essence of intel, is figuring out how reliable different pieces of information are and trying to find the meaningful signal in a world full of noise. Right. And noise and fog, you can think of the exact same way, right?
So if you look at this little bit of information, you have two conflicting pieces, and you assign reliability into those, and then you say, well, what do we know to be true? If we know this to be true, then how would we act? Then you come to that decision point. And this is where, like we said, we're reacting. We want to, at some point, start driving the event. This is where you don't want to get too stagnant. You have to make a decision. And sometimes that decision might be to collect more information, to hit the pause button to the extent that you can and start, like Jim said, have a smoke break or whatever that might mean. But that in and of itself is a decision.
Do it
and
on
you have
purpose.
to recognize that stopping is a choice.
Yep.
And do it on purpose. So if you are making these predictions, if you're assigning reliability to stuff, you just have to remember that these things are a hypothesis. This is one of the things about the OODA loop that I think gets lost, is that every time we make a decision, we're making a hypothesis about reality. And we're saying, I think this is what's happening. And when I act on that decision, I am testing a hypothesis, which is important to remember that you can be wrong and you have to reevaluate changing circumstances. So don't just go with, I think this is happening, so this is my decision, and then that's it. You make the decision because you're poking and prodding at the situation to try to evaluate how correct you are and adapt.
Science.
Yeah, look at that. Now, where this gets complicated is when you're trying to look at those templates. Earlier, we talked about how police officers will have a tendency to apply a criminal justice template or a law enforcement template to a counterterrorism problem and the situations that can cause for us. This is also true in situations where your options become self-limiting. So your policy, your doctrine, if, for example, you have to call and get permission for certain things, if you have to, higher headquarters has to make certain, judgment calls or whatever, those things can all hamstring you. But one of the easiest ways to think about this is the number of resources that are available, right? So if I go to a mass casualty event as an EMT or paramedic, we keep talking about active shooters and war and law enforcement. So let me just give you like an EMT,
train wreck,
paramedic,
multiple car pileup
type of example.
Whatever.
Yeah. Any mass casualty type of incident. You have, 20 people. It could be an active shooter, but it's not limited to that. How does the situation change if you have 2 units available, 2 ambulances, and 1 fire truck, we'll say, versus you have 10 ambulances and 5 fire trucks? And we've talked about this before in terms of tactics and scaling the problem, but I think it contributes to the fog and friction components because most people will say to themselves, oh, well, if I have 15 units there, that sounds great because I have enough room to put every patient in an ambulance and take them to the hospital. Okay, but where are they going to park? And how are you going to get them
and
there?
This has
and
really
in
come
and
up.
out?
This has come up in both mass casualty events and active shooter events where they couldn't find parking and they ended up blocking both entering and exiting emergency vehicles, right? So that's a classic friction point, is parking.
Right. And this is and cops do it all the time where we go to a call and everyone's trying to get close and no one, typically the cops don't go all the way up into where the action is. They'll stay back a little bit, get out on foot, and then approach. And so everyone will park around the corner and clog up those main arteries. And now you've got all these ambulances and they can't get in and out, which means what? Now I've got to carry the people or move them not using an ambulance or a car or something. So there's a point of friction, like Jim said. So in some situations, having only 2, like if it's you and 1 other person go to that mass casualty, this is easy because I can have 1 guy be my radio dude. Hey, your job is to go get help and coordinate resources. The second guy is going to go start triaging and counting patients. You're not treating, you're not rendering aid, you're just going to count and triage, and that's it. Hey, that's easy, right? So now you have everything in between. 15 people show up. Now everyone's like, where do I need to go? What needs to happen here? Who's coordinating what? A bunch of Indians and no chiefs, or too many chiefs and no Indians, right? This is where fog and friction in rehearsals becomes a problem because we have to adapt to either of those. So where that leads us is to an algorithm, right? Having a decision-making tree or some kind of model for the short list of maybe 2, 3 no more than about 5 priorities that need to happen on the sorts of situations you might find yourself in, whether it's a gunfight, active shooter on the law enforcement end, active shooter on the private citizen, just trying to survive that incident on your own, whether you're an armed citizen or not, with your family, right? That should be on your list of possible outcomes. And you have a little decision-making tree. If I'm by myself, then I'm going to do X. If I have my kids with me, I'm going to do Y. If I have my buddies with me, I'm going to do Z. What I would do as a private citizen, if I'm off duty somewhere with a group of my cop buddies and an active shooter rung out, would be entirely different than if I'm with my wife and kids at Costco. Entirely different. So you start trying to tease these things out and have that decision-making tree or an algorithm for coping with the fog and the friction.
Yeah. So the thing about the algorithm or having a checklist or a decision tree, whatever you want to call it, is you have to have the adaptability and flexibility to run it and follow it, and then recognize when you are off of that algorithm, when we are not on the script anymore, right? And you have to recognize it and have a good reason to deviate from it. But then when you do, you have to deviate from it and communicate that out as best you can to the rest of your team. Hey, guys, we're off script. We're doing it live. Let's go, right?
And that's a deliberate, conscious, purposeful thing. Like, It's intentional.
Yep. And I think where I want to go with this discussion is recognizing and predicting when you're going to hit fog and friction. What are the big warning signs? Like, ooh, this is going to be one of the weird ones, right? One of the things I talked about early in the episode was the AK-47 versus the Swiss watch. The more complicated my plan, or the more complicated, the more agencies I'm working with, or the more complicated the machinery I'm working with. If I'm working with like a F-22 or an F-35, man, there's a lot of electrons that need to go exactly the right place. Otherwise, I'm going to have to like control, delete my way through the airplane, right? The more complicated it is, the more I'm going to have to rehearse it. And the more important full dress rehearsal is, right? I've got to put all the gear on. I've got to show up with all the same stuff I would in real life. And we've got to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And we've got to do it together. One of the classic examples of this was when we tried to rescue the hostages out of Iran. This was late 70s, early 80s. The American embassy was taken in Tehran. There were 53 hostages. They were held for 444 days. We were going to send a joint special mission unit to go rescue the hostages. We were so amped up about secrecy because we didn't want the Russians to kind of tip off the Iranians that we never did a full-up dress rehearsal with all the parties who all had to work together on the night of. They never all worked together until the night of. And you had... was it Navy pilots flying Marine Corps helicopters, meeting Air Force airplanes in the middle of the desert at a air refuel or a ground refueling site called Desert One, carrying Army guys. And there were problems with the helicopters. There was weather they weren't anticipating. There was literal fog because of a sandstorm, a haboob. And like the problems just started stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. And they didn't have enough resources when they got to the landing site to continue the mission. As they were sorting out what they were going to do about that, one of the helicopters crashed into one of the airplanes as it was ground taxiing. And I believe it killed about 8 people. So that was a giant epic special operations failure. And from that, we have SOCOM, the U.S. Special Operations Command, and AFSOC and USASOC and all the different component special operations commands. And their charter is to all work together and train together and do those big dress rehearsals and those big exercises so that that doesn't happen again. Long story for a short punchline, you've got to rehearse together. And the more complicated your plan, the more of that you need.
One of the things that I really like about the teaching of guys like Craig Douglas. We recently had Cecil Birch on the show, and they talk about the entangled gunfighting problem, is that they tend to teach things in a very binary way, which I would normally say
don't do.
You'd probably have a negative connotation of that. You'd probably have, like, normally if I think of binary thinking, I'm thinking yes versus no, black versus white. Well, we operate in the gray. We live in the gray.
We want you to be agile, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that typically sounds like a bad thing, but in the context that they're teaching it in, I think it's really, really good. And this is why I use it as an example, because speaking to the frog and friction, you're kind of scaling it to the context that you would apply these principles in.
In a clusterfuck, you need to be able to get binary quickly, right? You need to be able to make it simple.
You have like only so many options to resolve that. I mean, you need to stab or shoot the guy. Get away, fight or get away. I mean, those are pretty much your options. So you've got to be able to simplify those in a very intuitive way. We talk about when the adrenaline hits, you lose 100 IQ points. And if your plan has all these layers to it, all the stuff that you talked about in the briefing is going to go right out the window, directly out the window, right? Because for the most part, we can only handle so many things at once. So part of the scaling of that decision-making, algorithm or whatever is making sure that you always have a couple of fallback principles. And one of the episodes that we're going to do coming up pretty soon is how we take those principles and apply them to practice, which is very related to this. It's very related to the tactician episode that we've done, or developing tactics. We did another episode on that. These things all kind of tie in together, but you want to be able to fall back to certain things and go, okay, for example, all else has failed, find work. What angle's not getting covered that I can go covered? Or all else has failed, I don't know what we're doing here. What's the objective? What is my objective right now? What's the most important priority that needs to be addressed? That's part of your decision-making tree, right? If you start wandering in too many different directions and you can catch that, you can go, okay, well, the plan, the Swiss watch, the AK-47, the sand and the haboob, and the... Hold on a second. What's the objective right now?
Yep.
Oh, make sure that the gunman doesn't kill any more people? Got it. Okay, I can handle that. What's the objective right now? Secure a crime scene? Okay, cool. Let's secure it then. You have a fallback that you can go to and say, fundamentally, these are the things that I need to worry about in my life, right? In my reality, whatever that is.
Yep.
There's a time and a place to wing it, to do SWAT shit, to do it live, whatever, find work. But you have to have those kind of things that maybe not binary. I mean, I guess the binary part of that plan is stick with the plan or go off script like we talked about. But what does that mean for you? You have to be able to simplify it. And I think the initiative, variety, rapidity, as much as that's kind of like hard to keep up with, I think those are the keys. Those are the attributes that make you more adaptable.
So I have a kind of side note on this, and this is a tricky discussion because we're recording right now in a very politically energized time, and the coronavirus pandemic has been very politically energized. Set whatever your views are on that aside, and think about just the fog and friction of COVID-19. How much in February of 2020, how much did we know about this bug versus March versus April versus May? And every country had to make a plan. Every politician, decision maker had to make a policy about what we were going to do. And then that policy...
A stance, a direction,
and then it hit reality. Whether you agreed with it or not, no matter where it was in the world, it hit reality. And people had to actually execute that plan or not. And you can see the fog and the friction, and it has cost lives. And so we're not just talking about active shooters. We're not just talking about World War III or hostage rescues. This comes up all over the place.
The pandemic thing actually brings up a really good point, because the important thing about talking about fog and friction, like, of course, when Jim and I put this episode together, we want it to be practical. We want it to be useful. So we try to distill some of the takeaways in a way that you can find useful. But there is no formula, right? Like, the pandemic thing was real fog and friction that we're still dealing with. And it's not like we can sit there and go, okay, guys, well, you need assign reliability to pieces of information, develop a plan, know when to go off script, and scale your. It's helpful for the people that are trying to problem solve maybe and work through it, but there's no answer. There's no math that any politician, I mean, are they making politically charged stances or policies or whatever? Yeah, sure they are. They're betting their careers on it, but they don't want to be wrong, right? They're trying to make this math happen in a way that, hey, we're kind of taking a gamble here. There's no specific formula. And so I think this is where the whole embracing it thing has to come in, is that you can't just say like, oh, well, this is an easy problem to deal with. Let's just sit down and come up with all these little things, and that's going to be easy. Give due credit to what the fog and friction really brings to the table, which is that unpredictability. I think that's something that gets lost in the politics of it. And again, it's not we are trying to set that aside, but I think it's something that everyone could probably wrap their heads around, is that there isn't a definite answer to any of this, to any situation that you're going to find yourself in. We can train for mass casualty events. We can train for active killers. We can train for pandemics. But when the actual bug arrives, we got to do it live, I guess.
Yeah. And that I think brings up a key point. So we have a couple of things in here that we think are good vaccines, so to speak, to fog and friction. We talked about initiative and harmony and variety and rapidity. We talked about training in a chaotic environment. One of my big ones is you have to test and train and exercise in a realistic operating environment. And you're never going to perfectly match the next fight you're going to be in. That's never going to happen. And it's counterproductive usually to constantly try to train to the last fight you were in, right? Because the next one's going to be different. That's war, right? But you can predict some things. In the military, we're going to eventually fight in the desert. There's like a 100% chance you're going to have to fight in hot, sandy conditions. So maybe we should test our equipment in hot, sandy conditions. And maybe we'll find out that, I don't know, the helicopters suck sand into the engines and turn it into glass and jack up the engines. Yeah. Maybe you're going to find out that if you get too much sand in a Black Hawk Serpa holster, you can't get your gun out of it.
Problematic.
Right?
Not that that's ever happened. Wait.
And that's a thing we talked a lot about with the ECQC and Craig Douglas and his ShivWorks program, is the concept of pressure testing. If you put a little pressure on these things in an operational realistic environment. Jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is cool. I recommend it. I've done a little bit of it. Mike does a little bit of it. But it's different between fighting on asphalt and fighting on a mat. It's different fighting on gravel from fighting on a mat. It's different fighting in full body armor and kit versus fighting in a gi. I know that flying an airplane is way different when I have body armor on and my fat ass trying to pull the controls back. And I can't.
I can't pull up any farther.
I'm already pulled up, right? So, so think about that and test and train and exercise in an operationally realistic environment. Your equipment needs to be tested. Your plans and procedures need to be tested in that environment. Train on asphalt sometimes. And you always have to balance risk and reward. And are we just hurting people? Or are we just bleeding for the fun of it? But you got to do it so that you can find those problems, right? Batteries don't like to work when it's really cold. That's a thing. I had 5 flashlights die during a survival training thing that I was doing because it didn't occur to me growing up in Southern California that was a problem. Turns out that's a problem. So that I think is critical, is test and train and exercise in an operationally realistic environment. And think about the phrase operationally realistic, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but you got to try. And finally, I want you to think about, how can I exploit this? How can I create fog and friction for the other guy? How can I create operational paralysis in him and confusion and chaos? Maybe that's computer viruses. Maybe that's jamming his radios or his radars. Maybe that's a smoke machine. Maybe that's a smoke grenade. One of my favorite sayings about military working dogs is they're a furry flashbang. You send a working dog into a room, that will be what the guy looks at. He's not going to notice the 3 guys stacked up coming into the room. He's going to notice the dog.
There's so many ways that this can play into tactics. If you're really thinking about the bad guy, you know, when you start trying to set these little traps, you're going to find your own sticking points. There might be ways that you can deceive his perception of reality in a sense that is helpful to you, but also in by kind of planning and thinking about how to do that, how to exploit it, you make your own tactics better because you're thinking, man, if I was doing this, this is what I would do.
Hey, red teaming. How about them apples?
Yeah. Have one of your teammates be the bad guy. Don't do that. Don't do it. It never ends well. Trust me. I'm kidding. It does. But yeah, I mean, you can think about ways that you can kind of distort their sense of reality and draw them into a certain direction you might want to go. In creating fog and friction, like we said, I think it's useful to think about the doctrinal definitions. What do we mean by frog? What do we
Frog and
what do
fiction?
we mean by fog?
Frog and fiction? Is that our new t-shirt? Gerbil Voodoo and frog and fiction? Fuck.
Yeah. What do we mean by fog? We mean diminishing their situational awareness and hopefully heightening ours. What do we mean by friction? We're talking about bottlenecking or creating actual sticking points where things don't work as well for them as they should.
I like that. So, have we cured fog and friction in this episode? No. Like, that's always going to happen. Have we given you a couple tools that you can use to build your situational awareness and maintain it and get through all of those little impedances? Hopefully, right? Through initiative, harmony, variety, rapidity, implicit guidance and control, tough training and exercising and testing your equipment in operationally realistic environments, pressure testing it. I think all of that helps. Doing dress rehearsals, analyzing your plans and looking for the friction points and never letting yourself off the hook with, oh, well, we'll do that in training, but in real life, we wouldn't do that. And embracing fog and friction in the sense that you're prepared to shift gears when things get weird. And you're prepared to go do SWAT shit or to go do special ops shit or whatever it is you got to do. So think about that. If you have good stories of fog and friction, we want to hear about them. Go ahead and reach out to us, send us a message, and we'd love to hear about it.
Something that I think can't be overstated, and that I want to make sure that we tag it again before we finish up here. And Jim kind of just did when he talked about implicit guidance and control and the initiative harmony thing, and that's exactly where I'm going with it. But more practically, I want you to think about the implicit communication that happens within groups. If you work with a team and you work with them often, right? Or a group of people, maybe not your immediate team, but they're groups of people, and you can anticipate their needs. If you do an exercise or a rehearsal or a scenario, what you want in the after action is, I saw you do X, so I did Y. I think I want to kind of go out of my way to touch on that because I really think that we capitalize on doing things quickly and having that tempo of adaptability by really trying to grab onto that implicit communication. That can't be overstated. I think that's a really big deal when it comes time to do SWAT shit, to find work, to do it live. That's the key. That's where the speed, the rapidity, the harmony, the initiative, I think that's a big part of it. So focus on that implicit communication stuff and the decision to go fast or go slow, right? When to turn it up, when to slow it down. That's a big key of this. That's the hardest part about my line of work, is not going fast, not going slow, but knowing when to do which.
That also reminds me of, one of our big mantras is people, ideas, and then hardware. And we try not to push hardware on the show, generally speaking. But when you're trying to decide what's worth spending money on, training that will help you get through this and rehearsal that will help you get through this is key. The other is anything that helps me see better is key. And John Boyd actually talked about this a lot. Good sensors make a big difference. If there's a better infrared camera that will literally help me see through the dark and the fog, or night vision goggles, and not all of that gear is worth its money or the weight or the friction that it will add, but anything that helps me figure out where I am, where everyone is around me, my situational awareness, positional awareness puzzle helps, and anything that helps me see better helps. So consider that. One of my favorite OODA loop discussions that I have with new police officers is your orientation steers not only what you see, but where you look. Mm-hmm. So we teach new cops when they're coming in, I'll ask a room full of recruits about, hey, what do you think is the best place to look to see whether or not someone is going to harm you? Like, if you think someone is going to kill you, what's the best indicator? And some will say, oh, their body language or the look in their eyes. And no, it's their hands, right? It's what they're doing with their hands. We want you to look at their hands first, because that's the first place you need to look. And then you can scan around their waistband and their immediate, span of control. But you look at their hands first. It's not about what you see, but where you look. And if you think about, this is actually a good fog and friction example that Jim can probably help me illustrate here. But if you think about like September 11th, where was the U.S. looking for most of its threats, right? Mm-hmm. They were thinking about, which is kind of ironic. We've come full circle here, right?
Oh, yeah.
We were looking for missile attacks, ICBMs and the Russians and whatever, and not really thinking about like guys with our own airplanes crashing into our buildings. There's a great book about that called The Ground Truth by John Farmer. And it is exactly about this. And he goes through minute by minute the communications that happened between the FAA and NORAD and the airlines, of them just trying to figure out what the fuck was going on. And the guys who were on the 9/11 Commission, like their motto as they were going through a lot of the documents was Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. What the fuck, as they're going through this. And it is mind-blowing. Yeah. And, it's easy in hindsight to be like, well, of course this was happening. But day of, fog and friction, classic fog and friction, right? So find the book Ground Truth by John Farmer. So not just what you see, but where you look. And the other example that I wanted to throw at you that Jim can probably talk more intelligently about is our invasion of Iraq during the first Gulf War, when we were doing these Taco Bell runs. Oh, yeah. And, we were sending our fighters at whatever time of day, whatever time of night. Everyone that was in the area would turn towards the border and just full afterburners. They'd hit the gas and go charging at the border. And then right at the last minute, they'd pull off. And they were paying attention to what were the enemy radars, what was their mobilization status, how was Iraq responding to all of us charging at the border. And it did two things. One is it fed us that intel on how they would react. And two, it conditioned them that was going to be normal. So on the night of, it was like, haha, you didn't think we thought we were going to turn around at the last minute, but we actually came through. Now what, suckers? Yep. So we exploited it for our own benefit in that scenario. So if you guys, as we're just wrapping up with this, if you guys have any examples, we definitely want to hear them. And a good place to do that is in our Facebook discussion group. So you can head over to Facebook, ask to join. There's a couple of questions it'll ask. It's just to make sure that you're there because you want to be there, not because someone added you without your permission. So if you have good fog and friction examples or ways that you've coped with them, then make sure you go there and share those with us so we can all learn from them. This episode is brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem of having to rack the slide every time you pull the trigger in dry fire training. With the Dry Fire Mag, you can build good habits by having a trigger that will reset so you can prep for the next shot without taking your other hand off the gun. You can check them out at dryfiremag.com. This episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution. It's formulated by a doctor for quick absorption of water into the parts of your body that need it the most. You can find it on dripdrop.com or even on Amazon. If you're military law enforcement and your organization is training or operating where it's hot, have your supply guy buy it for you. It's available on GSA Advantage and through the National Stock Number System. We publish new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. If you like the work we do, you can jump on Patreon, give us $1 for each episode. We put that money right back into producing good content for you and beer for us. So do that.
Yep. All right, guys. That's all we got. Good talk.
See you.